dia a totes i tots. Jo soc Heinrich Geldschläger, psicòleg
Hello and good evening, one and all.
i us dono la benvinguda al col·loqui Masculinitats, Migració i Prevenció de les Violències que organitzem entre l'associació Conexus i homes igualitaris en el marc d'aquest fòrum contra les violències de gènere. I primer de tot vull donar justament les gràcies a la plataforma contra les violències de gènere i concretament a la SAIF per permetre'ns fer aquest col·loqui, malgrat que el vam proposar molt a última hora, i per totes les facilitats i el suport que hem rebut. També moltes gràcies a l'Ester, que ens gestiona el xat, i a Luis, el control tècnic. Felicitar la plataforma per la seva capacitat de transformar, donada la situació de la pandèmia, aquest fòrum al format online i tot l'esforç que això suposa. La idea d'aquest col·loqui va surgir cuando nos van a donar...
Espera, que repito. Mira a ver si tenemos un cargador de Mac, perdón, que no sea nuestro, porque creo que le pillé a Ángel.
Conexus és el projecte europeu Fomen que
So this is the Fomen that aims at developing awareness raising workshops for refugees, for men refugees, and also a training for professionals working with these men in 6 European countries. And later my colleagues, Ponce of the organization, will tell you more about what has been done in the context of the Fomen project. At the same time, in Igualitaris, we are working on a new masculinity model. We target male migrants. We have the mandate of the Catalan government to do so. We carry out workshops on reflection about new masculinities for minors. Our colleague Paco Abril will tell us more about his experience up to date. In both projects, we try to reject the stereotype of migrating matters that some media are trying to boost, and we try to avoid this double stigma. And we also understand that migrant men are at high risk of being violent because they are subject to several vulnerabilities, trauma, violence, all forms of discrimination, etc. So, and have terrible experiences, traumatic experiences in their countries of origin that make them flee from poverty and injustice. And at the same time, they have traumatic experiences and different forms of violence and abuse during the migration process, beyond the migration grief that they go through. And oftentimes, we see horrible images of their lives. Once they reach their destination country, they face different forms of violence, institutional violence, and many limitations that and oftentimes migration processes in the face of these experiences and unfairness, the traditional model of masculinity brings them to react sometimes violently. That's why the two projects that we are presenting today put forward a work on gender relationships with men and migrant young men and that offers them a forum for intercultural dialogue to prevent gender violence. Before digging into the two projects, we have the pleasure to give the floor to Oriol Amorós, the Secretary for Equality, who will greet us to the panel discussion. We have the pleasure to count on Oriol's participation, not only because he is the political representative of the Catalan government in the two topics at hand, but also because he's an expert. He's an expert in the area, and for quite a long time he's shown his commitment for equality and against violence. Thank you very much, Oriol, for being with us today. The floor is yours. Hello and good morning, one and all. I hope you can hear me. Good. It's my pleasure, actually. I am very happy to be here. I am very happy to be part of this conference. I think that in it's amazing that in Catalonia we have such an amazing platform gathering us all. And I believe that many different perspectives can be listened in this forum to join efforts, to work together, to be stronger in the fight against this burden. I think it's amazing to have the possibility to celebrate this conference every year. And I believe that there's consensus in saying that perhaps a few years ago it was not so clear, but today we know that this is very important. We know that men need to participate in the process, both in terms of participation and in terms of intervention and reparation whenever necessary, right? But for quite a long time, we've been fighting against gender violence. We've been trying to transform mentalities, and it's very important to understand that women's perspective has changed a great deal, and some men have also changed their mindset also, but the outcomes are still horrible. Perhaps there's more violence because we didn't spot it before, but for sure we cannot stop our task. So there's consensus in saying that men need to be present. Men are oftentimes perpetrators, so we need to transform ourselves. Something is wrong with masculinity in today's world, so that's important. Let me refer to migration and gender violence amongst migrants. For a long time, we've had a program, actually since 2002, we started working in the area of violence and migration with a protocol against mutilation, which was a pilot project in Girona and in Maresma. In 2002, this became a countrywide policy, and to be honest, we also set up a specific team. We are extremely proud of this team because it's composed by men and, well, people that speak the languages of our migrants. So we have a program against gender violence. It was called Against Traditional Gender Violences, but actually they are all traditional, right? Because the macho culture is traditional in our country and also in some origin countries of our migrants. So these are traditions that we need to get rid of, that we need to transform. And we wanted to work with a typical scheme of the fight against gender violence, awareness raising, early detection, which sometimes is very difficult due to the capacity we have, the limited capacity we have to interact, language barriers, etc. And of course, we also wanted to focus on intervention and handing over. In this sense, I believe that we need to make sure that the network against the violence and the network to support women victims victims of gender violence place the focus in what is as perceived violence, which is gender violence between partners. And the Spanish legal framework has often, for quite a long time, often provided us tools to tackle this form of violence. Now there is another reform of the bill that will incorporate a new scope on gender violence, and by this what I mean is that the other competence that we have in the secretary that I represent is very important, and it deals with competences that before were. But for the first time we have a specific organ in the Catalan government which is called the Fight Against the Macho Culture Violence, and what we want to do between the two teams is precisely to, well, this is a challenge, of course, it is still a challenge because it hasn't been achieved yet. We want to make sure that all the facilities against gender violence is at the same time, or takes at the same time, an intercultural approach. That means we need to ensure that they have the capacity to fight against all forms of gender violence, so that there can be a single window. We need to support the fight against all forms of gender violence, both the more national ones, so to speak, and the important ones. This is an important change. Having a specific approach on each form of gender violence is very important. And at the same time, it's very important to, well, this is a principle where we've had, or at least for a couple of years, we wanted to incorporate men in this task. And of course, men cannot look aside. Women who are victims of gender violence, mutilated, assassinated, they are our daughters, our aunts, the women we love. So here is where we really need a sharp transformation. It's also true that some men are considered to be more macho, and this is not true, because unfortunately we're not free of gender violence, right? Nowhere in the world. But this idea sometimes makes us think, oh, okay, if we touch this topic with these people, all people have the right to have access to a service, to be free in our society, to get to learn Catalan, to get to learn more about the society, etc. So in these services we were afraid about incorporating gender violence just in case this would end up reinforcing the idea of some migrants being more violent. And I believe that this idea we need to get rid of, and we need to treat migrants without any form of patronizing attitude. So of course we need to speak about equality, of course we need to speak about gender violence with migrants, as well as we have to do it here at home. So this idea that perhaps would limit us a few years ago, we have decided to get rid of this idea, and we need to act whenever it's necessary. More specifically, I believe that this stereotype that affects all migrant men affects young migrants more importantly. As you might know, in the last 5 years in Catalonia, we have received around 6,000 unaccompanied minors. And this means that from the Secretary for Childhood and Adolescence, we work together with them, and they have had to open more than 250 centers in Catalonia. And this is easier said than done, isn't it? Because of course all these centers, well, the Catalan society, which is a society that I want to defend, it is a hosting society compared to other parts of Europe. Of course, I believe that we are a host society, but of course we are also a racist society, and these centers have not been easy to place. So, oftentimes when we open a new center, we face resistances, and the majority of the resistances we have experienced have not been against operating centers, but rather about or against ideas of what many citizens in this country consider that the opening of a new center to host unaccompanied minors will mean. And one of the most important stigmas and one of the most irrational and visceral stigma that we've had to face includes the idea of the men being violent against our daughters, right? And this has been one of the most important conflicts we have experienced. And the focus was placed on centers that didn't even exist, so neighbors would react because they were afraid. They had the stigma of that the boys would be violent, and this is very hard. This is very horrible because this is happening against boys and girls that are experiencing a terrible vulnerability, and they left their countries because something was wrong, right? The majority of these boys and girls have a family, an origin, a place where they live that has been subject to an economic vulnerability and oftentimes violence per se, gender violence, and this is the reason why many of them left. And when they arrive here, they are quite surprised. When you belong to an hegemonic group, you never forget that you never imagine that someone will be racist with you. And sometimes they have an idea on how the relationship between boys and girls will be here, and when they arrive here, there's nothing. It has nothing to do with the reality, and they are adolescents, and they are in process of building their identity, and they are deciding who they will be, as we've all been through at some point, right? I don't know if we have all overcome our adolescence. But adolescence is the moment when you build your identity and you dig in, and the reflection about the relationships between genders or the relationship between different people with different gender identities and sexual orientations. Well, it's extremely interesting and important topic, right? So we thought, okay, it is on the one hand true that if we tell everyone that we're celebrating these courses, organizing these courses, it will be like believing that there's more violence amongst migrants, but at the same time, we need to speak about it, right? We need to speak up. So what have we done? Several actions have been implemented. Some of them have been very successful, and sometimes they go unnoticed. Now, to conclude with unaccompanied minors, Paco Abril will tell you more about it, because we have been working with interest with egalitarian men, and between one and the others, we have implemented several trainings. I think around 350 and 400 unaccompanied minors have been trained. We've been in 33 centers, 17 every year approximately, and I believe that it's working very well, and we need to keep working because it's positive for adolescents and for everybody. So with these boys that have been subject to so many vulnerabilities, who are under attack, we need to work with them because it's very useful, and we need to break barriers, and we need to break stereotypes. And since oftentimes we don't know how to approach such topics, we need to learn to do so. And hopefully this will allow us to transform our mindsets and be happier. There's another area which is oftentimes quite unknown, which has to do with traditional gender violence in origin countries. We have started working in the area of feminine mutilation. We haven't started yet forced marriages. I believe that there's a lot of work to do in this area. We will have to approach this topic. But when it comes to genital mutilation, it's clear that prevention policies are very positive because you can obtain very positive outcomes. Sometimes it's difficult to measure because outcomes are quite heterogeneous. Prevention policies are very necessary, and in the long run, they are going to be the most important ones. But in this specific case, in the case of genital feminine mutilation, the feeling of receiving immediate outcomes is amazing. We have started some training sessions for trainers, for people coming from countries where sexual mutilation takes place. We have brought on board some men. Oh, by the way, I would like to say that one of the first organizations that I got to know, which was called Organization for New Masculinities, was a Senegalese organization. This is a way to break skins, right? Sometimes when we say new masculinities, we never think about African organizations. And the first one I was acquainted with was a Senegalese organization. I don't know if they took the same approach as Heinrich and Paco and all the speakers this morning, or Uriol and so many others that take this approach and that have been working in this movement for quite a long time. But what is the situation in the course as well? The situation is the following. Actually, since feminine mutilation is a gender violence, there is no doubt about it, but oftentimes it's perpetrated by women and against other women. So, and at the same time, it's a taboo. So, men need to men oftentimes use euphemisms such as honor, cleaning the girl. So when you implement a clear training explaining the direct consequences, the trauma, the effects on health for girls, health risks for women that undergo sexual mutilation, when you explain things directly, the effect is quite direct. There are many people who didn't know about it, and they had never spoken about genitals. So opening this page has a very transformative approach. So last year we trained 2 groups of trainers, and now we have 2 groups of trainers, migrant trainers, that are gonna be, I believe we have between 16 and 15 people that are of migrant origin. Last year they did the training, and now they're looking forward to start speaking about this point. And I believe that this is not the only training we need to carry out, but this specific work will have a very interesting impact. Let me conclude now. As I said before, the traditional roots of macho culture is not anything new. It affects us directly, and thus we need to start working, and we need to bear in mind that our fight against gender violence has a key actor, which is women. Women need to be placed at the center. There need to be the priority. The priority needs to be to defend women that have suffered gender violence so that they can recover their freedom and be free. So without losing track of this reality, I believe it's key to make sure that we work on aggressors. And of course, there's a certain work that has to be carried out from the penal domain, and some experiences are difficult. It's not always easy. Outcomes are difficult to achieve. Is it always a transformative outcome? Not necessarily. So the work we have to carry out has to include a transformative scope. We need to transform the idea of masculinity in our society. This is one of the key elements, right? And at the same time, I would like to say that we're working on the basis of a very interesting perspective led by Monte Subirana. The report published by Monte Subirana is amazing. So we're working with aggressors, and perhaps we should oftentimes it's interesting to work with a service that is judgment-free, so that we can have a wider impact. We need to work with men that are afraid of becoming perpetrators, and that's what we need to do, because leaving this at the hands of the judicial domain means approaching only one side of gender violence. There are interesting experiences. I think we all know the service of Barcelona City Council. We have several experiences in Barcelona, also in Mataró. We need to provide a stable service, a long-lasting service. We hope to eradicate gender violence. But while there's gender violence, we need to fight it. And we believe that this needs to be implemented in 2021. So there's no doubt about the following. Of course, this is just the presentation of a panel discussion. And sometimes in panel discussions, we say obvious things, don't we? And I believe that we've been fighting gender violence for a long time. I believe that things have changed a great deal. Men have changed, women have changed, but men, we haven't changed enough, because gender violence statistics are insufficient. They are poor. We haven't reached any positive outcome yet. It is still a horrible burden against women, and we need to work. We need to, of course, it doesn't mean we're all perpetrators, right? But if we don't work on our idea of masculinity, if we don't si no treballem sobre l'atractiu de la masculinitat, de quina masculinitat és atractiva i quins atractius hem après socialment. And we then learn about what ends up reinforcing violent masculinity, fake masculinities, masculinities that don't take care of others. If we don't make new masculinities attractive, there will be no way to eradicate gender violence, and that's the way it is. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I took too much time, but we're extremely happy both with the projects that, well, we're extremely pleased of the projects that we have implemented with groups of men, and we're extremely pleased of having these projects on the table. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Oriol. Thank you for your presentation. And that's the thing, right? When you invite a politician who's not only a politician but also an expert and who really believes in what he does, well, they take a long time to present their project. Thanks for sharing all these initiatives that you are implementing to fight gender violence, actually in the need analysis and in the best practices analysis that now Jasmin will share with us. This has been mentioned as a best practice. Thank you very much for this, because I believe it's very interesting to see how you want to include interculturality systematically within the services to prevent macho violence, and I think it's very interesting to put the focus on perpetrators, but from a mediation point of view and not only from a legal point of view, because this hasn't worked. Thank you very much once again. Burial. Can I say one last thing? I forgot to mention the following, and I believe it's very important. All the work that we have done in the area of mutilation prevention has been possible thanks to an organization called Jokerenda. It's like we had invented the whole program, and this is not true. This is thanks to our partners. They have taught us a great deal. Thank you very much for your comments. Okay, having said that, now, before moving to the presentations on the two projects, for those who are following us, just let me tell you that you can send your questions to the chat, and Esther will send me the questions via WhatsApp so that we can ask the question to the speakers. We also have Ponce, the head of area of the Secretariat for Equality. Will also give them the floor for their final remarks at the end of each presentation. I'm going to give the floor to Jasmin. She's a psychologist, an Italian psychologist that works in the Conexus organization, and she will tell us more briefly about what has been done up to present, which is basically a needs analysis to raise awareness on gender sensitivity and prevention of gender violence amongst migrant and men and refugees. Thank you very much and good morning, one and all. Let me see if I can make this presentation run. I would like to share the outcomes of the need and resources analysis to work with migrant and refugee men in the area of awareness raising on gender and violence prevention in Spain in the framework of the Fomen project. The Fomen project is a European project that will last 2 years, and it's co-funded by the European Union. The aim of the project is to promote innovative scopes in the area of sexist violence prevention, thus avoiding the double discrimination that has already been mentioned. Please, can we go backwards in the presentation? The project is led by several organizations in several European countries working with men, masculinities, and violence prevention. The first important step is to carry out the need analysis that I'm going to be sharing. Now we are in a second stage that forces the development of a prevention program targeting professionals and migrant men. The third stage, which is foreseen for next year, will mean the implementation of the second stage as well as the final assessment. When it comes to the analysis, we used qualitative and quantitative methods. The qualitative research consisted of focal groups and interviews. We counted on the participation of 20 professionals working with migrants and refugees in areas such as gender, masculinities, and violence prevention. The qualitative survey was an online survey that was sent to more than 200 people. The sample was composed by 48 professionals, experts in migration and intercultural communication, as well as gender and masculinities, as well as violence prevention. Both in focus groups and in interviews, experts would respond to the same questions. First, there was a research in the area of previous experiences and existing best practices regarding violence prevention and gender awareness raising amongst men, refugees and migrant men. Secondly, we assess the main needs and stakes of these men regarding prevention. We ask them how to reach them, what would motivate them to participate, barriers to participation, how to overcome them, amongst other points. Then we paid attention to the main needs and knowledge required by professionals with the aim to set up a prevention program and awareness raising program, and we asked participants what would make them engage. Last, we asked them for proposals for the future. On the basis of this qualitative research in 6 countries, we came up with a questionnaire that was translated into Catalan and Spanish and that was made available online through social survey platform. The questionnaire is composed by 2 parts. The first question has to do with the most relevant needs for migrant and refugee men. Then we ask them about how to reach a wider participation in the program, as well as the main barriers to participation, the main strategies to set up a safe environment within the program, and to tackle linguistic and cultural differences. We also ask them about the importance and the extent to which measures or needs of professionals are covered. And last, we ask them about best practices in the area of gender violence and prevention. Secondly, we had the aim to fine-tune our knowledge about best practice. The results will be presented in an aggregated manner on the basis of the qualitative and the quantitative research, but only the outcomes that ranked higher will be commented. Professionals consider that the needs of migrant and refugee men in the area of gender prevention and gender awareness raising has to do with obtaining recognition and acknowledgement of their basic needs, such as housing, a job, or perhaps the regularization of their situation in the country. Secondly, it's very important that migrants can share their migration journey and the trauma related to it, and also to have an open forum to feel understood and to express themselves. And it's very important to guarantee confidentiality. It's very important for them to be provided with communication tools and social skills such as empathy, active listening, assertiveness, and also tackling emotions and emotional expression. It's very important to ensure that migrants can participate actively and to the extent of the possibilities available be involved in the design and implementation of the program. More in particular, it was well considered or considered important not to tackle gender and violence from the beginning of the program, but rather start by better understanding their needs. The content in the framework of the program are the following: different forms of violence, violence against women, and the different forms of interiorization of violent behaviors, as well as masculinity and the meaning and definition of being a man, as well as the structure of the patriarchal society, as well as the definition of different forms of micro-machism. It's very important also to dig into the concept of alternative equality models as well as family roles as husbands and potential fathers. It's very important also to place the focus on sexual relationships and others. All these topics need to be adapted to the socio-cultural environment of participants. We need to avoid any form of Eurocentrism. Furthermore, it's key to ensure that methodologies are not directive, and it's very important to boost group cohesion. Last, it's very important to take an intersectional perspective and a positive approach by supporting best practices in the countries of origin as well. In the online survey, the most relevant needs were the following: to have the possibility to speak about their own migration experience, as well as about violence and discrimination that they have suffered in the past and they keep suffering. This can be an entry door to prevent violence. In general, it was considered very important to offer migrants a forum to reflect and share their own experience, and not so much learning about values and bills on different topics. When it comes to the strategies with a better ranking have to do with involving resources, the outcomes of the report have to do with local communities, working with migrants or refugees, or participation or leaders, respected leaders. This could ease. Well, the economic compensation was not well considered. Now, regarding the potential obstacles for men participation in a program of this nature, have to do with the fact that they sometimes have other priorities and needs, and the fact that sometimes they are victims of other forms of violence and discrimination, and that sometimes they can be victims of this double stigmatization. Some pressures can stem from the community or from the fact that some men are resistant to change. All this could lead them to abandon the program, and that's why before that the possible solutions could be to set up a mixed program between men, migrant men and local men, as well as tackling the topic from a holistic approach. It's very important to underline the fact that violence is a horizontal issue that affects all cultures, and a potential solution has to do with presenting the benefits of participating in this form of programs. The most important obstacles in the area of the qualitative research has to do with this double stigma, which sometimes is not a priority in today's situation. And also it is important to understand that these groups need to take place in the local environment. In order to achieve a safe environment, it's important to promote equality and inclusiveness between the members of the group, as well as enhancing bonds between participants and trainers on the basis of respect and acceptance. It's also important to bring on board members of the community or people from the same social environment. Similarly, the best possible strategies have been promoting and developing an inclusive environment based on non-discrimination, having cultural mediators or members of the community as co-facilitators. Also, and as it has been said before, in order to have a safe environment, we need to adapt the content to the needs of individuals and to clarify confidentiality regulations. In general, all responses have a rather high response compared to other blogs, and this underlines the importance of ensuring such safe environments. In order to resolve the language barrier and cultural barriers, we also considered that having a translator would be important. Even more importantly, the person would have, or perhaps we could use a member of the group with a higher language level, but we need to take into account also that if participants know the person might end up having a certain power on participants or make them feel a certain pressure or unease. Potential solutions have to do with training them and providing them with language skills or choosing participants that have a certain command of the language, even if this would exclude many people from the program. When it comes to the strategies, the most useful strategies to overcome these linguistic barriers have to do with counting with the participation of an intercultural mediator trained in the contents or being a national of the country of origin. As you can see here, there is a mismatch between this conclusion and the qualitative research. And in fact, during the focus groups and the interviews, not all experts agreed on this point. In general, it would be recommendable to use audiovisual resources or methodologies that are not always based on language. Three areas were researched between attitudes, knowledge. To carry out a program of this nature, we underlined the need to count on tools, skills, and intervention mechanisms to approach potential discrimination patterns or violent behaviors, as well as having a specific training on awareness raising and violence prevention, new masculinities, migration, and interculturality. It's also very important to ensure that professionals are acquainted with the social cultural community, as well as men, as well as their needs and the reality of their everyday life. Also, it's very important to ensure that professionals have tools to have, as well as reflecting about values, stereotypes, and prejudgments, to deconstruct sexism and racism, and last, having key skills such as active listening to thus have a more hosting modality. The organizational requirements are the following: having networks, inter-organizational networks to allow collaboration and exchange, as well as having a room for supervision and having a linguistic basic. When it comes to motivation, we need to be aware of the social need that brings us to gender violence prevention, as well as the recognition of the personal and professional growth that a program of this nature would entail, and how this can make the quality of work increase by improving protocols or improving existing interventions. When it comes to the needs that were considered the most necessary ones, have to do with reflecting about beliefs and experiences with migrants and refugees, reflections about gender, violence, and the combination of both. Also, it was considered quite important to have knowledge and skills to work on all these topics and carrying out a group intervention. In general, we should underline that all needs were assessed and considered quite important or very important, and at the same time, these needs are not necessarily covered. All these needs speak about the need for specific training to cover these needs that oftentimes are not solved. And here I would like to underline the previous experiences and best practice to prevent violence and if you need more information, you can see the report in the Conexus website, but in general, I would like to underline that the main conclusions in this list are coherent with our conclusions. So, now to conclude, the main strategies to reach men are networking with entities and organizations, intermingling our program with others or through community reference. The main challenges that we might face are the fact that some men sometimes have other priorities, sometimes they have resistances, and sometimes they are victims of double stigma and other forms of discrimination, and also the fact that sometimes there's a lack of protocols and specific methodologies to tackle violence and ethnic diversity. Now, to enhance men's participation to the program, the best possible strategies are tackling their interests and adapting to their needs, such as not dealing with the topic of violence from the beginning and ensuring that the program is considered as a safe environment where they can speak about their own experience with no judgment and underlining their responsibility towards change in relationships. To overcome the language barrier, it would be recommendable to count on the participation of cultural mediators from the country of origin. And on the basis of this analysis, we are developing a training program for professionals working with migrants and refugees, as well as a prevention program for men. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much to all of you who participated in the research. Thank you very much, Jasmin, for your excellent summary with all this amount of information that the focus groups allow us to gather, and also through the online survey. It's very important to underline that the need to count on professionals in the area was very relevant, as well as the importance to offer a safe environment for men, young men, migrants, for this reflection about their process, their migration process with regards masculinity and gender elements. Thank you. And now we're gonna hand it over to the next speaker for a practical example implemented by Igualitaris. The following speaker is Paco, Abril. He is a PhD in sociology and a professor in UDG. He's one of the most relevant researchers in the area of new masculinities, in the area of care, and he combines research with actions, specific actions in projects like the one he's going to talk about. He's also a colleague of Group Thomas for a long time, and now he will be speaking about the masculinity service. Thank you, Paco, for being here, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Heinrich, and thank you very much to Conexus for having invited me. Thanks to the platform. Our organization is part of the platform. Actually, we are one of the promoters, one of the sponsors of the network, so we have been working in the area for quite a long time now. My presentation will be about the service that has been referred before. Hopefully this presentation will work. So, I would like to give you a hint about the organization that I represent, the Organization for pro-equality man. The organization was founded in 2009, so quite a long time now. And one of the main goals that we have is to achieve real equality between men and women and to deconstruct traditional or hegemonic masculinities and thus preventing violence. These are our objectives as an organization. We are a man's organization, but of course we are open to women's participation. And we work on the basis of three axes. We want to promote reflection forums between men. Secondly, we also carry out activism, actions or interventions targeting youth and also political activism. We celebrate different dates against violence or to celebrate positive parenthood. And then we also carry out research in very different environments or areas. Today we're carrying out a very interesting research on masculinities in jails, in closed environments where not only interns have a word, but also civil servants and many other relevant stakeholders. Hopefully this year we'll have the opportunity to publish an article. Now regarding the program, they will be presenting the training service, which is coordinated by the Secretariat for Equality and Citizenship of the Catalan government and also funded by the National Agreement Against Gender Violence. Well, I'm the representative of 5 men that are leading the program as we speak. The program has not yet been implemented. So there's 5 important program managers. It's very interesting that there's 5 of us, 5 men that have been working in the area of masculinity, new masculinities for a long time with youth and different men groups. This has been useful to co-design the program. At the beginning of the program, we organized a few sessions, and there we discussed and worked about how we could target this work. And many of the ideas that we came up with are precisely the ones that have been mentioned before: intersectionality, interculturality, etc. Year 2020 has been complicated due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and this has had a very negative impact in our work. We have a certain uncertainty about whether we could conclude the sessions or not. One of the groups had to be closed. We have some outstanding sessions that need to be still celebrated. And we have also, experienced the difficulty of working with a mask, etc. Because language is already a barrier. Now imagine working with a mask, right? It's difficult to communicate. So we've had to deal with this uncertainty, and it's been a challenge. Since we came up with this idea, we thought that
I aquí, en aquest sentit, és important dir que nosaltres, com a dinamitzadors d'aquests grups, ens situàvem al mateix pla que ells. No? O sigui, no entràvem com algú que tenia una veritat o alguna a dir, no? Sinó que entràvem en un grup des d'un igual a igual, o més o menys igual a igual, amb aquest objectiu d'establir una conversa que ens permeti fer una reflexió.
So we wanted to open a dialogue on some of the dynamics that
fos un treball interseccional, evidentment, no? En 3 àmbits, en el tema de l'origen
we wanted to see the cultural origin, the religious origin of the boys and girls. Now it comes to age also, right? Because adolescence is not perceived equally in our culture or in the origin, in the cultural origin of these boys and girls. Many of these boys and girls learn about being independent from a very early age. And then there's gender, masculinities. This intersectional work is our guideline in all the sections. And then there is another point which has to do with avoiding Eurocentrism and the idea that us Europeans need to teach others about how to be a man. We wanted to avoid this approach and we wanted to incorporate interculturality and this wide debate, this wide positive reflection. And in this sense, I'll give you an example about how we did it, which is something that Jasmin has also mentioned. We wanted to take positive reference with its previous task of finding audiovisual materials that would allow migrants to feel represented by other forms of masculinity, alternative, attractive masculinities. One of the videos that we found is from a Men Engage campaign that was led in the north of Africa, that was implemented in the north of Africa, and it displayed a Moroccan man explaining about how hard his childhood was because his mom had to raise 7 children alone, and for him this was hard to the extent that he ended up setting up an organization that for women that ended up opening a school where equality was boosted. He's aware of the fact that in his culture there are immense gender differences. And this is an example about how by using international models we can boost a more robust equality model. What about other elements that have been dealt with horizontally in all the sessions with these boys and girls? Of course, masculinity understood as a social construction, as a relationships-based model related to practices beyond identity, and that sometimes depends on the socio-economic and cultural environment. So from this sense, masculinity can be redefined because all social constructions can be redefined. Secondly, violence, sexist violence, and the objective of preventing everyday life violence and understanding that violence is a process that depends on contextual elements that is related to masculinity, and thus are unavoidable. And last, working vulnerability. Vulnerability is one of the traditional masculinity mandate. Man cannot be vulnerable, they need to be strong. And we wanted to have a positive approach about vulnerability due to their situation, due to the trauma that they have experienced during the migration process. And also we wanted to have a positive approach about masculinity based on love. Now, we work with 17 groups of minors, of unaccompanied minors. We've worked all around Catalonia, Tortosa, Palafrugell, many parts of Catalonia, and in each group we organized 7 sessions. We worked on this critical reflection about the construction of masculinity, we raised awareness about privilege and explored other means of being a man based on a more balanced perspective. The methodology that we use, which is a methodology that we use in other workshops also. We always base our interventions on the participants' needs and experiences. So we open dialogue on the basis of their experiences, as well as the collective participation and the collective development of knowledge. This is also key to ensure that the learning to be more efficient. This is our experience, at least, when something is participatory.
Bueno, com deia abans també, nosaltres com a dinamitzadors ens situem en un mateix pla, propiciant el diàleg, la reflexió i la construcció del coneixement. Creiem que més que aquesta metodologia és bona,
this methodology is a positive methodology.
Molt vulnerable entre
This is a very vulnerable social group with very difficult social trajectories. And it's very important to take a positive approach so that they can express their experiences and have a more reflexive approach. From the beginning, we experienced some resistances in the different groups of participants, but from the beginning, they really understood our proposition, and with an excellent experience, we had an excellent experience. What is our departure point? It could be summarized with this slide, Men of the 21st Century. This project dates from last year. We have been working with men that are in jail, inmates, and it's based on the reset idea, escaping this traditional perspective. This man that is overwhelmed by mandates, by masculinity mandates that is based on denial of the feminine world, of emotions, and that of course entails certain risks against their life, such as violence. And we stem from the idea that the 21st century is a century for change, also for uncertainty, and thus it requires of new approaches to this 21st century men, such as more equality, more democracy. Of course, there's precarious job also, right, in the 21st century. So men today are not necessarily the breadwinners. So we need to make sure that we build new models that are based on other parameters, on other logics. The challenge of care, of self-care, of developing healthy relationships, managing your own emotions, and having a right balance, as well as an environmental balance. So this is our departing point, and here's an example of one of the exercises that we carried out. In this exercise, we did constellations about masculinity based on different perspectives that they have about what being a man means, and comparing it with a man here and there, and comparing with the different problems that some mandates impose, as well as finding solutions to such mandates. And this constellation allowed us to work on other topics, or spotting other areas that are important, such as men are breadwinners, men need to provide the family with a good life. This is an element that is almost part of many boys' DNA, so this idea, this conclusion helped us evolve. In the training session, some of the topics, well, here are the titles of the 5 sessions that we organized with each group. This will be 2-hour sessions that would allow us to do a quite intense job. The first session, as you can see here, has to do with masculine socialization in different ethnical and cultural environments. The second session is based on the sex, gender, themes, as well as a reference. We did a dynamics on masculine reference, not only based on the father and perhaps using it to serve as a mirror of the men we want to be, sexualities and sexual relationships, sexist violences in plural, and then there's a last session regarding self-care, mutual care, and environmental care. This is the guideline that we used to work the topics at hand, and the structure is the following. This is the way we structured the sessions. 3 different parts: an introduction to the topic, sometimes a theoretical explanation, then a values survey that would help us spotting certain stereotypes. We had the role of providers, which, well, you know, men work, women stay at home, even though sometimes in Morocco women work very hard. Sexuality or some myths regarding sexuality, and homophobia, which is, well, some boys don't understand homosexual relationships, so spotting this element would help us have a greater impact. In the central part of the session, we carried out a dynamic, a critical dynamic, based on a role play, on a body language play. Also here are a couple of images about the care session and mutual care session, based on an exercise of guiding someone who couldn't see around or has been eye-folded. And we asked them to reflect about how they felt while being taken care of. And we ended the sessions with a positive referent. It's not only about spotting the critical elements of masculinity in the national culture and in other cultures, but also putting forward solutions about how other attractive masculinities and alternative masculinities could be built on the basis of reference. We also used songs, because youth really like audiovisual narratives. It helps us critically assess certain rap songs or reggaeton songs or Arab songs that we would sometimes use, or even positive examples. And here, you know, our task, it's not an easy task, right? Finding positive reference that can have a rather positive perspective. Let me give an example about one that we really enjoyed. Abril. He's a rap singer, a Senegalese rap singer who speaks about his experience as a patrie, because his culture and the culture that he has experienced at school, and he also speaks about the different forms of violence that he has suffered and perpetrated, and well, this really helped us assess the topic from a different approach. We also implemented non-violent communication exercises. That is how we can communicate on the basis of spotting our needs and emotions and negotiating what we need with others whenever there's a conflict. So that's it for my... No, now to conclude. For me, it's been a very enriching experience, a very touching experience. It was very nice to have the possibility to share this boy's experience. In many cases, a very hard experience. There's a boy from Pakistan who came all the way to Spain by foot and who was in jail in Turkey, in Serbia. He was a minor. So crazy situations, horrible situations. Others have been homeless in Ceuta for a long time, suffering all forms of violence. So this emotional backpack was extremely touching, and also their resilience. They showed an incredible capacity of being resilient and wishing to build a better future here with us. And I found along also the need to work. I would like to congratulate the Secretariat for their initiative. I believe that this is a very interesting initiative. It's very important to work on all these topics because they are extremely criminalized. And, racism is at hand. We need to help them. So here are some of the assessments. And they are thrilled with the program. They wanted it to be longer, and they told me that they've learned a lot and things that would be extremely useful for their life in the future. And here is my experience. And if you have more questions, we can pose them afterwards. Thank you very much, Paco, for sharing your experience.
Crida l'atenció, no? Com tenia una coherència amb el que ens explicava abans la Jasmin respecte a l'anàlisi de necessitats i com molts d'aquests temes, moltes d'aquestes recomanacions ja estàveu incorporant en el vostre programa.
It's very interesting to see all these points.
Trobar els referents positius, no? Que ja ens costa aquí trobar referents positius.
It's sometimes difficult to find positive reference for youth.
Més i sembla fantàstic que aneu trobat. Perfecte, moltes gràcies, Paco.
Thank you very much, Paco.
Ara, com a última ponència,
last presentation, Álvaro Ponce, doctor in psychology, dear friend and co-founder of the Conexus organization, where he leads the attention, and he will tell us more about the following steps in the FOMEN project: gender prevention, gender violence prevention amongst migrants and refugees. Álvaro, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Heinrich. Let me see if this works. Hello, and thank you very much to one and all those who are present here. Thanks to the members of the platform who are allowing us to organize this forum in this virtual format. Very interesting format, the online one. And I would like to speak about this prevention mechanism for refugees and for professionals, for them to be able to implement these programs. As it has been said before by Jasmin, on the basis of the outcomes of the focus groups, of the interviews and the research carried out, we have been able to better understand these contents and ingredients,
con los cuales poder trabajar, ¿no? Y que junto a los diferentes equipos de trabajo que tenemos con los distintos partners de los distintos países, ¿no? Estamos en esta creación y desarrollo, ¿no? Tanto del programa de formación para los profesionales como de el programa propiamente tal de prevención.
So we're working on the prevention of gender violence and awareness raising on gender topics. But compared to Paco's program that is already achieving some outcomes and that has a factory experience, well, we are in stage number 2 or 3. And we also invite them to get on board in the implementation of the program that we want to implement in the near future. I will give you more information about this. So first, the first objective has to do with having the possibility to develop these empowerment programs for professionals working with migrants and refugees, especially in the area that has to do with gender empowerment and violence prevention, which is a field in which probably there is less expertise. And on the other hand, it's very important to be able to implement a program with migrant and refugees to prevent violence and to prevent gender violence and raise awareness about the identity construction or new masculinities that is causing so many trouble, especially when it comes hand in hand with these traditional elements that we all mentioned. How do we do that? Well, on the basis of training sessions and educational sessions that is understanding, awareness raising and commitment in violence prevention. And of course, we aim at implementing a short guideline that includes, as it has been said before, certain modules which are thematic models with a list of methodologies or techniques that facilitate the implementation of these specific modules. So now I would like to share both programs and the modules that both programs include, and perhaps I will also share a short taste of the methods that I'm referring to. So let's start with the program, with the training program for professionals. There's a training session for professionals working with migrant and refugees. The first module has to do with the presentation of the program, the aims and the methodology in terms of developing this attitude that also has to do with the dialogical construction, the validation with others that I perceive as unequal. This is based on these power relationships that we're interested in not perpetuating and that we want to modify, to change. So we depart from this dialogue, so we consider that I'm not gonna believe that you think that. No, my idea has to do with transforming ourselves together, so this positions ourselves, and this allows us to be in a different environment from a methodological perspective, from a work perspective, and also from a conversation perspective. So I just reject this idea and I position myself in a much more dialogue-based perspective. So within this area, the following training has to do with gender and masculinity, understanding gender and masculinity as a concept that requires of some awareness-raising techniques, because there's gender diversity to be taken into account, sexual diversity, or the LGBTI and queer identity, as well as the gender balance. It's important to recover gender relationships because it has to be a dialogue, it has to be based on a dialogue, and it has to take into account power relationships, and on this basis it's very important to speak about the expectations and the socially constructed horizons about what a man or a woman should be, and on the basis of this and then there's this diversity of masculinities. How can this be translated into concepts? How can a transition be implemented? By the way, I thought that there's this presentation on the 21st century men that is extremely illustrative, and it's all about
hacia unas masculinidades más cariñosas o con capacidades cuidadoras, ¿no? Más consideradas, más igualitarias, ¿no? El módulo 3 ya entraría
Model number 3
concreta entre la violencia
has to do with a specific relationship with gender relationship, the relationship between violence and
la estructura adherente de estas prácticas de violencia y que pueden llegar
the inherent structure of these practices that might end up provoking a confusion. Practices sometimes are done, it's very difficult, it's very different doing from being, and it's very important to understand that all these practices are little by little, well, so it's very important to make this clear difference, and from here on start working and understand how this identity, this masculine identity, this hegemonic identity facilitates the acquisition of these practices that
entender que no es un problema de esa identidad en concreto o en ese sujeto individual concreto, ¿no? Sino que es un problema estructural, es un problema
social. So this is a structural problem, a contextual problem, and this means that violence has its own character, its own specificity, not only. So it's an endogenous condition, not an exogenous one. So it's not only that there's this person that has a problem, but rather a problem that we face oftentimes. And there's module number 4. Carlos, podem canviar un moment amb la Marga? Tinc una urgència. That who are these migrant men? Why are we stigmatizing? It's very easy sometimes to. So it involves an analysis.
Poder contrastar, ¿no? Analizar los medios de comunicación, cómo se va construyendo este foráneo, este inmigrante, ¿no? Que a los cuales se le adhieren estas etiquetas o conclusiones fáciles y poder entonces nosotros mismos tomar conciencia de que esas conclusiones y construcciones no necesariamente están representadas en ese colectivo, ¿no? Entonces también hace un poco esa reflexión crítica sobre esos elementos. Luego en el módulo 5, ahora sí, en el módulo 5 trata sobre la sensibilidad cultural, ¿no? La sensibilidad de lo que significa esta experiencia migratoria, ¿no? La situación traumática y muchas veces con todo un desarrollo postraumático, con muchas pérdidas, con muchas...
With many losses, with a great deal of pain, and of course this helps us understand in what extent or what weaknesses these people experience, and how this can make us can allow us to understand their personal experience, and that in the interpretation we have to include intersectionality and cultural diversity to avoid all forms of ethnocentric bias or essentialism.
Aquí está la importancia de hacer partícipes, ¿no? Mediadores culturales, ¿no? Y de explicitar también los deberes y derechos que estas personas pueden tener en la sociedad acogida, ¿no? No solo los deberes, sino que también...
So it's very important to see what rights they might have. In module number 6, it has been said before, we need to understand language not only as an analytic language, not only as a literal language like a Google translation, but it's about understanding the complexity of language. And when we translate, we are interpreting, so this does not only include text, but also the non-verbal and the context that includes the possibility of giving audiovisual techniques, music, and the body, finding the body, and having an interaction. And this matters when it comes to communicating. Communication is not only giving a command and others following you. It's, having a dialogue, having a narrative. Model number 6 or 7, as you can see here, is the last one. It has to do with the conclusions that we have obtained on the basis of all the research carried out previously. It has to do with violence prevention. It's about understanding how violence is installed in violent masculinities and exploring how an unbalanced and how emotions such as rage can facilitate these violent practices. And this is very interesting, both when it comes to understanding oneself as understanding others, not being capable of expressing one's own needs through nonviolent communication brings people to allow things tragically, and this is when violence happens, and that's what means, right? This is violence against others and against oneself, against disconnection forms of the emotion and subjectivity and the body. And last, there's conclusion and goodbye, which is a reflection about the different elements, the most relevant elements that have been somehow understood in the context of the training, and also in reviewing the main difficulties that I'm going to find as a professional when it comes to implementing this point. What challenges am I going to find? What expectations am I going to find? So, all in all, this will be the program, the training program that we have come up with the different partners. This is a training for professionals working with migrant men and refugees. On the other hand, there's a prevention program that we want to implement with these migrant men and women. It is composed by different sessions. In some cases they are very similar, and they have to do with the welcome, the introduction to the program, the mediators, participants, also counting on the different fears and expectations that participants might have, and roles of behavior. It's very important to underline that it's going to be a care environment that aims at carrying out, being in a safe environment, and also knowing that everything needs to be based on a constructive approach. The idea would be in the first session to have the possibility to carry out a test about what each one of us understand as regarding us some points and specific topics. In module number 3 or 2, we speak about migration and on how about, or what I have experienced about these narratives and these difficult moments. Poder reflexionar sobre eso, poder recoger, ¿no?, lo difícil de esa experiencia y poder facilitar o promover una condición o una conducta resiliente frente a ello, ¿no? Luego entender las condiciones locales para refugiados y migrantes. Also understanding the local conditions for migrants, legal rights and responsibilities that they might have, and also the future perspective that these individuals imagine in their destination, experiences, homophobia, racism, bureaucratic burdens, and other threats to these migrants. Un módulo 3 estaría compuesto por las temáticas de género y masculinidad, en donde se hablaría sobre las relaciones, los roles de género. Module number 3, masculinities, gender,
sobre la equidad de género, sobre la expresión de diferentes identidades de género y sobre la diversidad
gender
de
expression,
identidades, ¿no? O sea, comprender que
diversity,
existen muchas posibilidades de poder ser hombre.
understanding that there are many ways of being a man.
Sobre el cual yo me guío,
There's not only one
sobre
option.
cómo tengo que hacer hombre, de que solo existen estos pasos para convertirse en hombre.
So,
Entonces, a partir de eso puedo comenzar,
on
¿no?
this
a
basis, I can
reconstruir de alguna
start
forma esta masculinidad
reconstructing
hegemónica,
this masculinity, this
facilitar el
hegemonic
desarrollo,
masculinity,
¿no?
and developing
La
and
posibilidad
easing the
de
development
crear, ¿no?
or the possibility
ese
of
espacio de seguridad de una
together
forma
building a
identitaria,
new
una nueva
form
forma
of
de expresar
identity,
esta
a new
masculinidad.
form of understanding
En el
masculinity.
módulo 4, ¿no? Se habla
In
sobre
module
las
number
relaciones
4,
íntimas, se habla
we
sobre
discuss
la
about
sexualidad, ¿no?
social
Explicitando que existe también
relationships,
una forma de
sexuality,
relación sexual, ¿no? Sobre cómo ligar, por ejemplo, ¿no? O qué
new
pasa si un
forms
chico
of
quiere ligar con una chica
sexuality, what
del
happens
nuevo
if a
lugar
boy
donde están, ¿no? Cómo
wants
son vistos,
to
cómo, ¿no?
interact
Etcétera,
with a
sobre las
girl from
dificultades,
the
sobre los temores que puede implicar
place
eso,
of destination
también
and
sobre la
about the
paternidad y
fears
la familia,
related to that,
los roles
also
que
about
están
parenthood,
muy
the family,
encerrados,
and the different
interiorizados
roles
dentro
that
de la
oftentimes
masculinidad
are
masculina,
very much
quizás
interiorized
no se
within
trata solo
masculine
de proveer,
identity,
¿no?
then
O sea, no
sometimes
se
it's not
trata de
only
poder
about
ofrecer cuidado,
providing, but
ofrecer
also offering
afecto,
care,
ofrecer seguridad
offering
únicamente
affection,
para
offering
ser un buen
security, but
criado, ser un
not
buen
only
amigo,
from an
sino
economic
responder
perspective, but
a
also
necesidades
being
emocionales,
available,
¿no?
being
Desde
present,
ser compasivo, ¿no? Y
being
de cómo eso
compassionate,
realmente promueve
and how
el
this
desarrollar
also
relaciones sociales
enhances your
significativas,
possibility
relaciones
to
sociales íntimas,
develop significant
participar en una comunidad y una
social
sociedad
relationships and
con unos roles y
participating in a
expectativas que a
community
lo
with
mejor pueden
roles
transformarse
and expectations that
y
might
no
transform,
necesariamente
that
tienen que
might become
corresponder
different,
con esa
and that
masculinidad
do not
dominante
necessarily
que existe en
correspond to
esta
the
sociedad
hegemonic
contemporánea.
mainstream
Luego estaría la
masculinity. And
sesión
then
del
there would
módulo 5,
be module number
dedicada al
5,
autocuidado.
which is focused
Al
on
autocuidado entendido
self-care.
como no es
Self-care
un lujo,
understood
sino que es
as
una completa necesidad,
not a
porque
luxury,
para
but
poder
rather a
ayudar a otros,
need,
primero
because in
tengo
order
que
to take care of
cuidarme,
others,
¿no? Y esa
first
es
I need to
una
take care of
falencia
myself.
recurrente que
And this is one
masculinamente
of the
tenemos como género, ¿no?
weaknesses that
Entonces,
we
poder
have
desarrollar una
as
masculinidad
men. So
pedagógica,
having a
¿no?
positive and
Amistosa,
care-based
¿no? Que
masculinity
participa, que está presente
that participates,
y
that is
que tiene que
present,
ser
and
capaz de
that
mirar su propia
is
vulnerabilidad,
capable of
¿sabes? Es ser capaz
understanding
de
its own
contemplar a lo mejor una vulnerabilidad
vulnerability, that is
robusta,
capable
¿no? Una
of
vulnerabilidad que no necesita
accepting a
cubrirse de
robust
armaduras,
vulnerability
que
that
puede
does not
expresarse
need to
y puede
cover itself
dialogar sobre ella,
with
puede estar en contacto con ella,
armors
¿no?
that can be
Por
in
ejemplo,
touch with
narrar su
itself
experiencia de impotencia,
through
sus miedos, sus
sharing
preocupaciones, sus inseguridades
frustration,
y tratar de
uncertainties,
reconocerse y qué cosas me están
concerns,
ayudando
and
a
gaining
trabajar con
awareness
ello,
about what is
¿no?
helping
Cuáles
me
son
when
mis
it comes to
estrategias
dealing with
cómo
these
podemos apoyarnos unos a
difficulties.
otros
What are my
y
strategies? How
reconocer
can
las
I
fortalezas y los recursos
support
que pueden tener
others?
cada una de las personas, ¿no? Después el módulo 6 tiene que ver con la violencia, ¿no? En entender que existen diferentes tipos de violencia, que violencia no es solo golpear, que violencia también incluye otras formas más invisibles
Violence
de
includes other
violencia,
forms
más
of,
dañinas, como la
well,
psicológica o como la sexual, ¿no? Y que pueden
other
también
forms of
ser
violence,
distintas,
and
¿no?
it might
Entonces,
be very
poder
present
hacer
in
una
other.
descripción clara, concreta, sobre la existencia de esos tipos de violencia,
About the existence
¿no?
of these
Hablar
forms
sobre
of
la violencia de
violence.
género en específico, sobre la masculinidad y la
Speaking about
violencia
gender
de
violence
ellos
specifically,
hacia otros, hacia las mujeres
four
y hacia sí
axes.
mismos, ¿no? Y entender por qué tenemos que hablar de violencia, ¿no? Porque la violencia está muy a la mano muchas
We need to
veces
speak about
dentro de las
violence,
identidades masculinas y como una
especially.
forma de proteger y prevenir su aparición, ¿no? Porque es un proceso que se va desarrollando y
It is
mientras
a
más vamos
process that
practicando
little by
cosas que
little
facilitan eso, es más
is
probable
developed,
que
and the more I
acabemos
practice, the
llegando
more
a perpetrar esa
chances I have
violencia,
of
¿no? Por tanto, ¿qué cosas
ending
me
up
ayudan
becoming
y me
violent. So what
protegen?
helps
Y
me
que si más las
protect
practico,
myself
menos probable va a ser que ejerza violencia, ¿no? Utilizando incluso hasta la neuroplasticidad de nuestro
using
sistema nervioso a la hora
neuroplasticity,
de
our
adquirir
nervous
habilidades
system
o
to
de adquirir
acquire
capacidades.
and develop new skills and
Y
capacities.
finalmente entender las consecuencias
Last,
dañinas
we need to
de la
understand
violencia,
the
¿no? De cómo la
negative
violencia
impact
en
of
el fondo
violence.
es causa de muchos problemas
Violence
psicopatológicos en los demás, ¿no? Y eso entenderlo desde
provokes
la perspectiva de la víctima,
psychopathologies on others, and we need to
¿no? ¿Qué
understand that
consecuencias
from a
acarrea
victim's
experimentar
perspective,
ese
from the
tipo de
victim's
violencia? Y en esto
perspective.
también repasar los momentos en que ellos también han sido víctimas de violencia, ¿no? Y finalmente, explicitar
And
y
last,
hacer claras las
it's
leyes que
important
existen en el
to
territorio de acogida
speak
sobre
about the
la
legislation
¿no?
to
leyes de
fight
protección contra la violencia. Y en el módulo 7, que sería como el
sexist
final
violence,
de
and there's module number
contenidos que se
7
entregan, ¿no? Estaría la prevención de la violencia, que
that
tendría que ver con
includes
todo el desarrollo
violence
y la modificación
prevention,
del
which has
comportamiento
to do with the
violento, ¿no?
development
Proporcionando herramientas
of
prácticas
violent
para la
behaviors
prevención de
by,
esta, ¿no? Como la exploración de la ira, la regulación afectiva, la socialización de
for
género, el
example,
estrés, la frustración,
gender
bueno, ejercicio de
socialization,
conciencia
etc.,
corporal y de acción, de expresión no violenta
as
y
well as body
pacífica, ¿no?
expression
Empezar
for
a generar
non-violent.
en pequeñas guías, en pequeñas actividades, formas de que ellos puedan relacionarse con ciertas experiencias emocionales,
It's
sobre
important
todo de
to
impotencia
have
o de ira, de manera que no lleguen a convertirse
a
en algo
better
violento.
interaction with
Y por
one's
último, la
own
conclusión de
emotions.
este día sería la
Last, the
revisión y la
conclusion and
retroalimentación de cómo ha
goodbye,
sido la experiencia, el
feedback,
tránsito a través
exchange
de
of
este programa
practices
y las
and
perspectivas para el futuro,
feelings,
¿no? ¿Y ahora qué?
ideas about the
Hacia adelante,
program,
¿no? ¿Qué podemos seguir haciendo? ¿Qué
and
podemos seguir
ideas for the
aprendiendo?
future. What
¿Cómo podemos
about
seguir
from now on?
mejorando?
What can we
La
keep
entrega de certificados,
doing? How can we
y me
improve?
temo que por
Then
la
there's also
situación
a
actual,
certificate handing over,
no
and
sé si habrá
today,
pica pica, ¿no? Es como
hopefully,
habitual cuando se
in the
cierran los
future, it will be the
cursos,
case
siempre hay una pica
about,
pica o
but
celebración
we
de que se
don't
ha
have the
terminado el
possibility to
ciclo.
have a snack altogether, which is what we usually
Y
do.
entonces en los términos prácticos,
And
¿no?
now when
Hay
it
una
comes
pequeña
to the
planificación
practical
temporal,
thing,
¿no?
there's
Dada la
a
situación
short
COVID actual, las fechas
planning
tentativas
in the
de la
framework of
realización de estos
the,
programas,
well,
¿no? Por un lado está el programa de formación para
there's the
profesionales
training
inmigrantes
program
y
for
refugiados.
professionals working
Tenemos
with
previsto su realización
migrants.
hacia los meses de
We
febrero y
are
marzo del próximo
expecting
año
its
en
implementation in
un
February,
formato
March
online,
next year in
en
an
8
online
sesiones
format,
y con una duración aproximada de
8
unas 3
sessions
horas
with an
por
approximate duration of
¿vale? Entonces,
3 hours
aprovecho
per
que estamos en
session.
esta conexión, ¿no? Con toda la gente que nos está viendo, de que al final voy a poner unas direcciones web y de correo electrónico para que nos podáis contactar si es que queréis o estáis interesados en participar dentro de este programa de
I
formación.
will share some links with you.
Y por otro lado está el programa de prevención de violencia, ¿no? Para los hombres inmigrantes y
There's a
refugiados,
program on
que
sexist
pretende
violence
realizarlos hacia el mes de
prevention
abril y
program that will be implemented in April, between April and May
estamos
next year.
pendientes de ver qué
And
formato será el posible y el más adecuado, ¿no? Puede ser que
we're
sea
still
online,
thinking about the
el
most
número de sesiones será 8 y la
appropriate
duración de las
format.
sesiones puede ir entre las 2 y las
There will
4
be
horas
8
dependiendo de cada sesión,
sessions.
¿no? Se va a organizar el número de horas totales en función de, por ejemplo, la primera sesión puede ser más corta versus
We still don't know how long it's gonna last. We're still
mientras
thinking about it.
más horas de realización. Y por último,
Last,
una idea breve así.
let me give you a
El
short.
tiempo, ¿no?
Sí, se nos tira encima del tiempo
Vale,
y
pues lo dejamos
propongo
aquí. Pongo las
muchas-
direcciones un segundo.
Sí, eso sí que es importante.
Ups. No alcancé a ponerlas.
Okay, I'm just gonna share these links that I mentioned before. No, it's not working.
Bien, ahora sí.
Okay, now we can see them.
¿No?
There we go.
Las direcciones de las páginas web.
Here you have the website to Conexus and the EU program, as well as the email contact address.
Perfecto.
Thank you very
gracias,
much.
Álvaro, y perdona
Thank
que
you very
el
much,
tiempo se
Álvaro.
nos tira
And
encima, hemos
sorry to
empezado
interrupt you.
un poco más tarde.
We have started a little bit
Muchas
late.
por
Thank
esta
you very much
explicación
for
de
your
los diferentes
presentation. Thank you very
programas,
much
tanto de formación a
for
profesionales
your
como
presentation
de
of
intervención
both
preventiva
programs.
con
It's been
los hombres.
very
Y tenéis la
interesting.
dirección para quienes
You have the address here in case you are interested in receiving more information or taking part of the training. Thank you very much to all the speakers. Now there will be a session for Q&A and discussion. You can send your questions through the chat box. Esther has already sent me some of the questions, and I will, of course, transfer the questions to the speakers. Meanwhile, I would like to invite Montserrat Solé of the Secretary for Equality. She is in the round zero, and I know that she wants to share her reflections with us. Ponce is in charge of the service that Paco mentioned on the side of the Secretariat. Thank you very much for being here, Monse. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting us, and thanks for all the work on your side. I've been extremely pleased with the presentations, especially the workshops presentations on new masculinities. I believe that this is an initiative that started last year and that has continued this year, and we are not present during the workshops, and that it's very interesting to understand how you perceive them, what challenges and barriers you face, and how do you overcome them, because of course we mentioned the different topics that we wanted to deal with the youth, but the way you do it and the way you reach them and the different difficulties that we face or that you face, let's say, is something that you need to do, something that you need to carry out, those who implement the training. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your goodwill, and thank you very much for your willingness to adapt and to work with boys that, as you've said before, experience many vulnerabilities, but also so speaking about this topic with boys and girls that don't speak the language, so thank you very much for your effort. I would like to underline that I would like to say also they are extremely brave. They've taken a very important decision, and they are willing to be successful. So those who work with this youth understand that this is, you know, they are open to new learnings, they want to participate, they want to know more. If we offer them a language course, they will be up for it, so they are extremely open. So yes, I know they are extremely vulnerable, but at the same time they are extremely brave. Probably they are amongst the bravest. They are not ill, they are not sick, they don't have any specific difficulty, no, it's just that they have a very strong will, they have left their countries, and they don't know what they're gonna find on the other side, they don't know what limitations and difficulties they're gonna find, so they are really, really strong and vulnerable, and they have very important, strong will. I don't want to take any more of your time. I think it's very important to start working with grown-up men. So we need to start working down this area also. And thanks for all the work on your side. This is a rather new topic. We haven't had the time to deal with the topic, and now for a couple of years we've been working in this area, and as Abril said, at the beginning we were perhaps a little bit shy, and now we're happy to, quite surprisingly, as we implement more and more actions, we find no problem in working with these topics with men, with women. As I said before, they are thrilled, they are happy, they are willing to learn, they're willing to understand what is the context in which they have decided to live, and that's why we need to help them. Thank you very much.
Moltes gràcies a tu, Montse.
Thank you very much, Montse.
Per la vostra implicació, no, com a secretaria en aquests temes, i em sembla molt important.
I believe that it's very important to underline that beyond vulnerabilities and difficulties, there's resilience and there's the brave character of these men and women. I think that Montse Sanchez, the Deputy Director to Fight Sexist Violence, would also like to take the floor.
Montse, micro. Tens el micro tancat.
Ara?
Ara.
Molt bé, bon dia a tothom.
Hello and good morning. Well, first of all, I would like to share a reflection regarding diversity. It has already been said by Oriol Amorós. I think we need to widen the participation in men's groups. At the beginning, it's important to understand what 2020 meant. Paco, Abril said it's been a terrible year, I know, but at the same time it has opened room for new opportunities. We have placed important resources at the disposal of women. And many of these resources target women. We want to protect them, we want to ensure that they find a friendly environment and a way to dignify their lives and overcome gender violence. The specialized services have been doubled, so now these entities are closer to the ground. Now we cover less than 95 women per center, so we are now closer to all women, as it has been said before, and as a few months ago the minister said, we are making the territory, the landscape more permeable to the support mechanisms, and we have multiplied by 4 the available apartments for women having to escape. What will happen in 2021? Well, we will face many challenges, and as it has been said before, one of the main challenges would be to take multiculturality in services into account. We need to take a wide perspective. We have been focusing perhaps a little bit too much in violence happening in an apartment, let's say. So we need to widen our definition of sexist violence, and we need to do so from an intercultural perspective. And the second challenge we have is to stop speaking only about women and start speaking about perpetrators, those men that we need to we need them to stop behaving the way they do. So working with men is one of the challenges that all administrations have, especially all those working in the area of gender violence, and the Deputy Direction, or the Deputy Directorate, which is the only organization devoted to gender violence, is vetting for adopting this wide perspective, this ample perspective, and getting rid of perpetrators in our lives. There's no room for perpetrators in Catalonia, so we need new masculinity models Men who are against gender violence, thank you very much for all the work on your side, and thank you very much for sharing your scope in this forum and in the session that the Plataforma is organizing. Thank you very much to all of them. Thank you very much, Ponce. It will be extremely interesting to see how we can work with perpetrators. We have very little time. Actually, we have no time at all. It's over 12. But well, we have decided to move on for a few minutes. There's a question that was directed to Oriol, but perhaps Paco can answer it. It's about the perspective that adolescents have towards violence. Do they accept it? Do they reject it? What is the narrative? Paco, please go ahead.
En els tallers, i també hi havia per part de la Maria José la pregunta per tu si es poden consultar els materials i les activitats que heu fet servir amb els joves, per exemple, els recursos audiovisuals.
Maria José, there's a question regarding whether the materials that you mentioned before are available, are public. Regarding the narrative, violence, etc.
Que reconeguin d'alguna manera qui són els orígens de la violència.
We've been working on recognizing the origins of violence, the aim of why violence is used, understanding when they do a specific use of violence, and also what are the objectives that have to do with the development of masculinity and the mandates of masculinity. This is one of the main targets we have, this bond between violence and masculinity, this link between violence and masculinity. And while it hasn't been said, I believe that it's important for everybody to understand that violence is not necessarily only a physical behavior. There are subtle forms of violence that oftentimes go unnoticed. It's sometimes difficult to spot physical aggressions. Many people reject physical aggressions in theory and in practice, but sometimes it's difficult to gain awareness about to what extent in our everyday life, due to the mandates and the privileges in which we have been socialized, we oftentimes act in a violent way without even understanding. In 2 hours, no miracle can be achieved, but at least we can open a door for a wide reflection about how to spot these other forms of violence, of everyday life violences, and as it has been said before, participants show to be very open-minded, with faced rather few resistances. Because of course we all have great judgments, and I was surprised, positively surprised about how positive our participants have been when it comes to discussing certain topics. I was also thinking about a case, about how, well, this is an extreme case. We are also working in jails with youth, and also in jail there are boys that have been under public supervision due to violence or drug trafficking, and I recall a boy sharing a situation of violence, and he didn't understand what happened. I mean, he reacted violently because she told him that he was bad, and he hit a person in the street quite violently and aggressively. And for him, well, there was a connection between his frustration and his violent behavior, and the program aims at allowing people to understand how we express our violence or our rage, and we are sometimes not capable of putting forward such emotions in a constructive way, and I believe that this lean is our target. Now regarding the second question, well, we think that it's important to edit a PDF presentation with the content and the materials and I think that it will be, you will be able to download it from our website. We'll leave some time to do so, but I believe that this is a very interesting experience that can be useful for others. And these materials need to be available here in the website. You can get in touch with us on Igualitaris.cat and we will forward all the relevant information. Thank you very much, Paco. We have similar questions. Nuria Calvo says it's very interesting. Jasmin's presentation is very interesting. She would like to know whether it's possible to obtain the PowerPoint. Yes, it's possible. You can send us an email to investigación@conexus.cat and we will be forwarding this presentation and it will be uploaded in our website. The report has been uploaded here. Jasmin's presentation will be uploaded in the website as requested. By Maria José. Álvaro, the training would be interesting also for professionals in other fields. And there's a question here.
Sobre la implementació d'aquesta formació, crec que l'Álvaro ho ha explicat, és a dir, la formació per
Álvaro has already said it, the training for trainers will be at the beginning of March next year, and if you're interested, you can get in touch with us. So Laila asks about a resource for youth, migrants over 18 to work on new masculinity and gender violence prevention.
Traslladar a la taula, en un principi també, quan nosaltres entre abril i juny portarem en pràctica la implementació dels tallers.
Between April and June, we will start implementing the workshops for young men.
Paco, altres recursos.
I don't know, Paco, if there are other available resources to deal with this task.
Joves adults.
Well, I believe that if the main organization is working on migration topics and more recently to new topics related to new masculinities, they have some materials. I can't remember if it's targeting adults or the population in general. Yeah, this is another resource that is available and it's related to best practices. Unfortunately, we will not be able to the questions. This is more than a question of a claim by Maria Dolores Casas, by the National Hosting Network. They say that the center, the host center for unaccompanied minors has closed, and this leaves them in a very vulnerable situation. This is a claim for the Secretariat. Please coordinate with the relevant administrations to solve the closure of this center in Masno. And we will have to leave it here now. We will have to close this session. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much to all the speakers. Thank you very much to all the participants. Thanks to the audience. And you will find an assessment form in the chat box, please. Fill it in if you have a few minutes. Thanks once again to the platform for making this conference possible, for making this panel discussion possible, Ramey, Esther, Luis, and all those who have participated. See you next year. Goodbye.